and fill the paper with the message that it wants to send.
Welcome to the Aviatrix Writers Room. I'm Liz Booker, and I'm continuing my conversation with McCallum Staats about her book, High Flyers, 15 Inspiring Women Aviators and Astronauts. I just want to make sure that I got that right. And all of her other books as well. So, Anne, you're the author of 9, mostly nonfiction, books for young readers. So tell us more about your writing journey and how you got into writing and how you honed your craft.
Sure. Well, it kind of, again, I said this before, but I really didn't ever imagine myself as a writer or as an author. Books were just kind of, I loved to read when I was a kid, but they were, kind of this pie in the sky. Somebody else did those. They weren't real people. They were, these entities somewhere else. But I really got my interest in writing when I wanted to share this idea. And I thought, how can I reach more people? And I did like to write. I just wasn't that good at it until I, practiced for a long time. And so I just kind of chipped away at it. My first book, actually, I have it right here. This is The Secret Life of Math. And it is actually a book about how people all over the world came up with these similar strategies or different strategies rather for similar problems. So everybody had to count, like, how are you going to count? Different people use different ways. And depending on the environment, you use sticks or you'd use clay or whatever. So I just kind of fell into it. And I know, you kind of fall in love with it too. Like once you start writing and you start reading and you start putting those words together, it's hard, but it also is really empowering. And so I just, I kind of just kept at it. I just kept at it and at it and at it. And then, you incrementally get better. So
that math,
and then
math book was your first book that was published and it won awards, right?
Yeah, it did. Yeah, it won Gold Book of the Year award by Forward Magazine. So it's kind of a cool way to start.
Yeah, that's really great. So with these books,
thank you.
Like High Flyers and like Thrill Seekers, which are the 2 that you've done so far in the series, you're sort of having to boil down people's life stories into a consumable chapter that is appealing to kids. And so how do you approach those? Like, we talked about in the first part of this interview how, almost half of these women have their own memoirs out there. So how did you approach that to make it appealing to kids?
Well, for one, I wanted to make sure that I kind of got these sort of behind the scenes details. I didn't want it just to be a textbook. First they did this, then they did that, then they did this. I also didn't want it to just be, this, oh, those are those kind of people. And I'm, there's nothing that I can connect to because they're obviously these superstars that aren't even real. So I did not want to have it be like that. I wanted to make sure that people could connect to the stories. And so what I did is I started off with some sort of inciting incident. I wanted to, start with something exciting, interesting, grab your attention, go for that roller coaster. But then I wanted to also talk about their childhood because all of these women, none of them started off with things easy, and they all had humble beginnings. Some had very difficult beginnings. And I wanted to really, share that in a way that made it seem like they weren't just handed what they got. They really persevered. They had grit. They made goals. They put themselves out there, which is really hard. It's risky. And, so that was kind of the way that I approached it. So I did want to do, as many behind the scenes, interesting tidbits that were, that a kid could connect with or anybody could connect with because adults read this book too. and then just really frame it that way.
Yeah, to that point, I just want to say that this is a book that is absolutely appropriate for all ages. I enjoyed reading it as an adult too, and learn more about people who
Thank you.
I knew some of these stories already, but several I didn't, and then several people who I have been following on Instagram for years, and now I get to know a little bit more about them. So it was really well done, and I do think that those anecdotes about their childhood make it really super accessible for young readers. So that was a great way to structure that. So do you have an agent that kind of helps you sell your books?
I do now have an agent, but for the longest time I didn't. In fact, I've only had my agent for the last 2 books, and he's actually in the middle of negotiating this next one as well. So yeah, for the longest time, I did not have an agent. I've worked with 3 different publishers so far, and I just, I queried, and it's kind of funny because with the Women of Power series, it wasn't, that wasn't what I pitched first. Actually, the first book that I had with them is this one right here.
Okay.
Women Heroes of the U.S. Army. And so this is a book that goes through women's contributions since the American Revolution and what women have done all the way up to modern times to contribute to the U.S. Army. And again, like the thing that, well, just a tiny little aside, the thing that got me excited about this book was that whole idea that it wasn't until 2016 that all gender restrictions were lifted. And I was like, holy cow, that's recent. That's only a couple of years ago. And, it just blew my mind. So that's what started that. But even this book was not what I initially pitched to Chicago Review Press. I had pitched to this editor there, and she said, no, not really interested. Actually, it was like, it was about pirates. It was a story about pirates. And I thought that was really cool. But she was like, no, I am not really interested. But, feel free to send something else along. And so that was just that little teeny, door open. So I was like, okay, she didn't say, I never want to hear from you again. So I came back and I really studied their catalog very intensely to see what they did. And I came back with a list of other topics. And then from that list, she wrote back to me and she said, well, the one that has the most, marketability is really this women heroes idea. And so then, there were a couple more back and forths, but it was really me like not giving up because like she kept saying no to this, but then also giving me this tiny little carrot that said, oh, but if you have something else. So I kept, kind of going and building on that. And eventually I ended up, with that book, and then eventually it was the Thrill Seekers and the High Flyers.
I have to say something about Chicago Review Press really quickly because I see their imprint on so many books about women in aviation, whether it's memoirs. So this is for the women in aviation out there who are thinking about writing, especially nonfiction. I don't know if they do much fiction or not, but I do see their imprint. So keep them in mind. And they seem, and how is it working with them? They seem to support their authors.
Oh yeah, no, they're fabulous. They're wonderful to work with. And I just, really great people. They have a marketing department, so they actually do a little bit of promotion, which is awesome because up until Chicago Review Press, it was 100% on me. So they do, a little bit, which is fantastic. And, really great to work with, honestly.
Well, so talk about that a little bit. So if you were doing your own book promotion, like how do you approach that? And how's it going?
Well, so I wasn't one of those people who, immediately loved social media. I had to, kind of get myself into it because you really have to put yourself out there. You really do. Like you have to. And sometimes I'd be like, oh, am I, tweeting too much about this? Or am I, Instagramming too much about that? And you kind of have to put yourself out there. And so that's number one advice. But also just seeing what other people have done. So like sometimes I'll look at an author that I admire and respect, and I'll kind of see what their results have been. What have they been successful? Where have they been seen? Who have they interviewed with? All that sort of thing. And I'll kind of piggyback on them. So that's another thing. Another one is a critique group. So I have a fabulous critique group. We've been together since 2015, when all of us had maybe 1 or 2 books. And now the most prolific of the group has 50. I just read that the other day and I was like, oh my goodness, 50. Yeah, so that
are you guys promoting each other and each other's work on social media?
We do.
I love that.
We do. And also, yeah. And the other thing about a critique group is really, you're kind of, you have this obligation to share something once a month. Now, of course, occasionally I'll miss a month, but I always feel like, if we're going to put this effort in, I've got to have something once a month. And so it kind of keeps you going, it keeps that momentum up, which is often difficult as authors, as we know. Sometimes it's just you, yourself, and the computer. And, so it's good to connect with others, for sure.
I want to say the Aviatrix Writers Group, which consists of about 130 plus authors right now, authors and aspiring authors, people who are writing. We started critique groups about 5 months ago, and I offered to lead one with 3 people who had never been in a critique group before. And then we have one other group that's consistently going with 3 or 4 members in it. And I will say that I'm getting as much out of it as my friends are. I mean, I've had critique partners, for years, but getting together with the women in aviation and watching their stories grow together, and then hopefully being able to, like you, after being with them for several years, I'll be able to celebrate our mutual successes. After, when you are a critique partner with someone, you are emotionally invested in that story. And so you want to see it get published. So yeah, I love it. I'm a big proponent of critique groups, and hopefully we'll continue to grow that activity within the Aviatrix writers as we go along. Are there any other resources or any other advice that you have for aspiring writers?
Sure. Well, so I belong to a couple other organizations as well. So one is, if you're writing for kids, the absolute must group is SCBWI, and it's Society of Book Illustrators.
Society of Children's
What is it?
Book Illustrators and Writers. It's a mouthful.
Yeah. Okay. I know. I knew what it was. My mouth was open. But anyways, SCBWI is fabulous. So they have regional events, they have online events, they have conferences, all sorts of different, boards that you can join in on. And they're fabulous. Also, I belong to the Children's Book Guild of Washington, D.C. So again, that's about, I want to say how many there's probably around 200 of us. And we meet, we have been meeting online, but normally we meet once a month for lunch, and we have speakers. Again, totally motivational. And, anytime you can get with like-minded people, it's just so empowering. So they're great. I've also gone to Highlights. Highlights has a bunch of workshops, programs, again, mostly for children's, but they're another excellent resource. Yeah. So lots of stuff.
Always promoting SCBWI as a member myself. And then obviously, if you're writing for adults in whatever genre, there are groups for you, there are conferences and workshops for you, and go find your people. And then if you're writing about women in aviation, write with us. So join us. Yeah, exactly. So I saw, speaking of SCBWI, that you are giving a workshop, and I actually love the way it kind of harkens back to the story about Karen Nyberg and her space quilt. The title is Like Sewing a Quilt, Piecing Together Narrative Nonfiction, and you're hosting that on September 8th. How can people join that workshop if they're interested in writing narrative nonfiction, especially for young readers?
Well, so if you just go to the SCBWI website and go under events, then it's going to list all the events. And this is an online webinar, so anybody can join. Anywhere in the world is fine. So that would be the easiest. I also posted it on my website. So if you're at my website anyways, andmccallumbooks.com, then, just pop on and check that out as well. But yeah, SCBWI events, and then there's a list of things that are available.
Do you give other writers workshops that we should be looking out for?
I'm actually in the middle of doing a mentoring class, but this is kind of my first time doing this. It's really super fun. And a couple of, the class is very eager. And I love that because, just that enthusiasm and also like just being able to give back, right? So I'm doing that. And,
is that something that's still
also,
open for people to join, or is it closed for now?
Well, I mean, that one is not, but I have done some just one-on-one mentoring before as well. So, if somebody's interested, just reach out to me and go to my website, reach out to me, and I'll get back to you. If you have questions, comments, whatever, I'm happy to entertain all of those.
Is there anything else that we didn't talk about that you want to make sure aspiring writers know?
Well, I just want to say how thankful I am for the women who, took time to talk to me for all of these last 3 books that I wrote. Because, some of the people I wrote about are extremely busy and, they didn't have time, but they took time anyway. And so I just want to give a giant shout out to, tell them how much I appreciate them taking that time and also how excited I am about sharing their stories with the world. And, what an honor that was to do so.
I want to say something about that from the writer's perspective. I think when, your mission or your intent is in the right place, like yours is, to share inspiring stories with young people so that they can believe that they can do something too. When you reach out to people, they're excited to be a part of that. And so just to encourage other writers who are considering writing sort of these biographical sketches like you are, to not be afraid to reach out to the big people. They will. Yeah. I mean, that's been my experience with this project, is reaching out to big name authors that when they hear the purpose of this project and what I'm doing, they're excited to be a part of it. And so as a way to encourage people to pursue that if that's of interest to them and share our stories.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well,
Yay.
And one more time, thank you so much again for your book and for sharing your insights about writing and publishing. And I might sign up for that workshop just to listen in. I'm writing fiction right now, but I've really become a fan of this narrative nonfiction format, and both in adult and in young adult. So it might be in my future too. So I want to hear what you had to say.
Oh, well, thank you. And thank you so much for having me. It was just super fun.
Yeah,
so
my pleasure.
To save for later, you cannot trust it to come again. To wait for you to find a pen and fill the paper with the message that it wants to send.